Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War, Warhammer 2, Cool Wake Magic gameplay. This time around we are playing as the forces of Nagash against the Skaven on the map Chill Flow. And this time around, my original intention had been to make use of some of the fancy vampire units that you get as the followers of Nagash, but I ended up deciding against it last second and ended up doing a fairly standard or pure Tomb King infantry or pure Tomb King unit list. So for my lord, I'm running Harg in the black because obviously that's the only legendary lord option you get. Otherwise, you can do a vanilla Tomb King lord. And he is coming in with the usual Fate of Buna and Spirit Leech. I do think Fate of Buna is actually decent against Skaven if you have to deal with a serious contender, especially with this sort of build where I don't have too much AP. If my opponent brings a lot of, say, Stormvermin or specifically Stormvermin Halberds, then I really like the option to have a Fate of Buna to melt them down and make them an easier target for the rest of my troops. I also did bring the Liber Mortis, of course, as usual, just for that 44% physical resist, Staff of Nagash for the improved power recharge rate, and the Tomb Blade of Arkan to regen. To replenish the HP and heal my troops. For my front line, it is a pretty cheap mix of Skeleton Spearmen veteran up with the single unit of Kepler Guard anchoring things in the middle. These guys are somewhat like the Stearnsmen, though not nearly as durable. On the flip side, they do tend to deal a lot more damage, and because of their magic damage, these guys can definitely lay the smackdown on a lot of the Skaven elite infantry. They'll tear through Plague Monks, Sensor Bearers, those sorts of things, and they'll even trade fairly well with Stormvermin as far as I know. They are backed up by a single Necrotect here in the middle. I think the Necrotect is still a good choice. I know it's not everyone's opinion, but he does have a bonus against infantry, decent enough melee stats. He does provide some buffs to nearby constructs. Now, unfortunately here, he's not actually positioned well enough to make use of those, but I figured I'd flex it where needed. He does have the Wrath of the Creator, buffing the nearby construct's AP and melee attack. He does have Stone Shaper to boost our survivability. Fan Braces of the Sun, which I think is great because -9 melee attack means -10%, almost, or -9% chance to hit. The Flame Resistance is irrelevant, but still pretty cool. And then he does have Restore, of course, to heal my constructs up. On the two anchoring the front line, I do have two Hydro Titans, and I think the Hydro Titans are definitely pretty solid. These guys are very tanky. They have a lot of HP, over 9,000. They're basically like giants, but their stats are much more balanced. Giants have if you ever look at giant stats, it's something like 30 melee defense or 35 melee defense and 65 melee attack. So this is very imbalanced, very offensive oriented, whereas Hydro Titans are much more mixed, much more balanced, and they also do cause fire and magical damage. And fire damage is actually useful against the major counter the Skaven have, which is the Hellpit Abomination, which of course is susceptible to fire due to its regeneration trait. So definitely a major weakness there. Behind that, I do actually have 3 units of shooting. I actually think the skeleton shooting is decent against Skaven. You can outrange most of their troops. If they try to skirmish with you, you can snipe them down. And you can actually overwhelm artillery or monsters that might be threatening your higher titans with these guys. And I think that's pretty significant. Especially as the main threat here is enemy artillery. I need to shut them down, get rid of them before I make any other major plays. For the rest of my army, I do have 2 units of Carrion backing things up all out in the corners, ready to dive in on artillery. For my opponent, pretty standard build. You can see a front line of Lanternats with shields. These guys will soak up some artillery fire. They'll be able to soak up archer fire, and they'll be able to outtrade the Skeleton Spearmen pretty decisively. I'm pretty sure fairly decisively. Probably not amazing. They don't have the best of stats either, but they'll trade pretty well. They can also take down the Higher Titan, or at least stall it and cause some extra damage to it, because they are anti-large. And you can see the Higher Titan here is taking an absolute world beating from those Warp Lightning cannons, already down by about 1,300 HP. Behind that, my opponent has gone very heavy with the Plague Furnaces. He does have 2 of them with a pretty solid amount of spells. If we can look here, both of them seem to have the same selection of spells. They do have the built-in Pestilent Breath. They do have Wither, Plague, and Pestilence Birth, which I think is unnecessary. I think that's way too many spells. I think that's definitely a bit of overkill. I think you'd be better off just bringing 1 or 2 spells, if any, on the Plague Priest and the Plague Furnace, but nonetheless, these guys will be able to crush my infantry very quickly, despite the fact they're anti-large. And they can tie down my Higher Titans for a decent amount of time just because they're pretty tanky and pretty durable despite their low melee stats. Finally, my opponent does have 2 units of Stormvermin Halberds backing up his artillery piece, the Warp Lightning cannon here. These guys can definitely monster mash the Higher Titan if they get the chance. Hellpit Abomination, which can lock down the Higher Titan and stall it, and then a Gracier of Ruin with a whole bunch of spells once again. We do have a Cracked Skull, Death Frenzy, and Warp Lightning, so definitely a decent selection, as well as all the usual buffs like Arcane Conduit and Unholy Clamor. He does, of course, have the Screaming Bell and So definitely a very solid selection of spells. You can see I immediately do drop the carrying down onto the Warp Lightning, trying to shut it down, and it doesn't seem to really be working because the Stormmen are right there, and they're warding these guys off. Now Stormmen won't do amazing against them, because Stormmen do have pretty pitiful melee attack, especially against units with very high melee defense like these guys who are small, but nonetheless, they will eventually chop them down. However, I do get a Fate of Buna off, and that is going to start melting these poor buggers down. You can see they're already losing a lot of HP, and they're going to be down by a whole bunch by the end of this spell. Because Archon is right over here, while this artillery fire is focused on the Higher Titan, chipping it away, and causing some major hurt. I do dive in with the second unit of carrying here. I didn't want to feed all the units in at once. Just trying to stall them, just trying to stall a little bit, buy myself some time, but they're not really able to take the Warp Lightning Cannon crews offline just because those Stormmen are right out there. But now the archery fire is coming in, and those Warp Lightning Cannons are going to go down like 9 pins. You can see, this is one of the things that I think people don't realize, but archery fire can actually demolish artillery pieces, and you can see here they immediately lose a gun, and they're shortly going to lose a second one to that fire. And the third, of course, is not going to be long for this world. You can see the crew is already falling apart, and things are definitely looking pretty grim. Over here, the carrying do get back up to the sky and manage to get clear. It's definitely a little bit of a win for me. So this is definitely something I would recommend. If you're playing as a faction with missiles on foot, do try to focus fire. Do try to focus fire enemy artillery if you can. If you can bring guns offline, that is absolutely wonderful. And oftentimes you can destroy the guns themselves pretty effectively. Now over here you can see the Stormmen are very badly mauled. You can see over here the Higher Titan does cast a Spirit Leech on the Plague Priest. Of course, these guys do have built-in spells, and they do improve your Winds of Magic regen. I do cast Libra Mortis over here, but you can see my opponent making great use of those spells to kind of whittle down and really beat the snot out of my powerful infantry. You can see another wind spell, just so many spells going down, and in the meantime, I'm using my Fate of Bunas in a really tactical sort of manner, trying to annihilate, in a strategic manner, trying to annihilate these powerful units like the two Stormmen, figuring that if I can get rid of them, I'll be able to outtrade the Hell Pits, and I'll be able to deal with the rest of my opponent's big nasties with the Higher Titans themselves. Over here you can see the Skeleton Spears not having the best of time of it, though on the other hand, of course, the Stormmen are not going to do too great either. They're definitely not really meant for this sort of fighting. You can see I'm not entirely sure what my opponent was thinking there, perhaps a miscast, but you can see the Stormmen actually do route to terror there. Definitely a little bit of a problem. Over here the Clan Rats are going to buckle against the might of the Kepler Guard, and they're going to get massacred here in this pursuit. Of course, Kepler Guard being skeletons are way too slow to pursue them for any length of time. Over here, the Higher Titan using its death lasers to melt some poor rats into the ground, just melting them into slush, and it's getting smacked here by this annoying Hell Pit Abomination, which does have decent stats if we look. 350, bonus for larger 17, but actually the Higher Titan does have decent defenses itself, and you can see with Tomb Blade of Archon it's going to be healing, it's going to be dealing smacked on these rats. You can just see the Stormman getting laid low by its mighty strikes. Really pretty powerful, nasty, and now it's turning its attention onto this Hell Pit Abomination, which really doesn't stand a chance in extended combat. It is being buffed by Archon, of course, who is providing that +5 melee attack and melee defense with his Lord Aura, and that's definitely pretty decent. In the meantime, these archers, the ones that aren't being shut down by my opponent's ramming from the Grazeseer and from the Plague Priest, are chipping away at the Hell Pit Abomination, just trying to help get this unit offline as quickly as possible. Obviously, they are suffering terrible losses in the process. Over here, the Kepler Guard does get a rear charge in, but my opponent does summon some Plague Monks to try to disrupt them. Definitely a bit of a nuisance, though I will be able to buckle, I do believe, these Stormmen pretty effectively. You can see that despite everything, the Higher Titan is struggling to really effectively deal with the Plague Priest. It's getting distracted and blocked off. You just see a Burning Gaze of Shem's Burning Gaze hitting the Grazeseer of Fruin there, and this poor Hell Pit Abomination is not going to be long for this world. It does get hit by another hit. You can see almost 600 damage going in from that fire damage, and it now breaks, and the Skaven Slave Spears the only thing left there. And these guys, of course, do not have the morale to stick around for very long. Over here, the Shopti summon does go down, and these guys will be in a good position to rear charge into these summoned Plague Monks and deal with them. While my opponent's infantry repeatedly routes, and they're really struggling to kind of stay in the fight where they need to be. Now, I do want to pull this Higher Titan into the fight here to try to save my archers, but it's simply not an option because it's getting surrounded. Now, this is the big problem with the Higher Titan, and perhaps this was a bit of a mistake on my part, bringing these guys rather than the War Sphinx. The Higher Titan, despite being a lot tankier in prolonged combat and generally better sort of straight up combat, the Higher Titan has a major problem with getting clear of Stormmen, or any infantry really. The Clan Rats are just so much faster than the Higher Titan. They've got 37 speed to 32. It's really not able to kind of escape, so it's going to get surrounded here. It's going to be stuck monster mashing Skaven Slaves and Clan Rats, which is really just inconvenient. Over here, the Shopti do monkey stomp all of these guys, though, and they will be able to push off these Stormmen as well. I do push them into these filthy rats over here, and they're going to be cleaving some Stormmen halberds. And despite the fact these guys are armored, I figure that with the fact that these guys are my free Shopti, might as well make use of them to crush the most dangerous units left on the field. Over here, you can see the Higher Titan is winning, though of course the Kepler Guard is dying in the process because it's simply not able to do quite enough. The Higher Titan is chipping away at this Plague Priest. It's almost down. You can see another Burning Gaze there going down the Glacier of Ruin. And I'm going to get Archon the Black dueling him. And Archon the Black does have decent stats, so he will be able to eventually beat that guy down, and he does. Finally smacking him down. You can see the poor rat there laying on the ground with his broken bell. So with my opponent's leadership broken, it's definitely a much better situation for me. You can see, despite the fact that the Higher Titan here is wavering, I will be able to kind of start routing some of these troops off, get those Skaven slaves clear. You can see it does kind of just cleave some of those filthy rats there with its AoE. And now the Ushopti, despite generating rather quickly, are coming back for another go. Of course, these Plague Monks being summoned are going to fall apart rather quickly, and you can see I do cast another Liber Mortis, trying to keep my troops intact. With the rear charge coming in from the Ushopti in their last legs and the last little bit of HP, I do manage to tear out these Clan Rats' shields, and with them out of the way, I'm going to be able to start solo dueling my opponent's troops. You can see over here the Plague Priest has been routed finally by the might of the Higher Titan. Over here, the other Higher Titan is going to be slugging it out with the Plague Priest one-on-one with the Necrotect, and Archon coming in to help. So he's definitely looking rather good, despite the fact that my opponent has these Stormmen over there. I'm not entirely sure, just Clan Rats over there. But these Stormmen are so low on morale that if they even try to come close, they will simply insta-rout. So they're not really an option. My opponent has essentially been reduced to just these Clan Rats, which are very close to routing, and the small handful of Plague Priests. So we're just going to throw things to fast forward. You can see I do fire another Ship's Burning Gaze at the Plague Priest, forcing a rout, and now it's just everyone against this poor Plague Priest over there. And with another Spirit Leech coming down from Archon, he is going to shatter and trigger that final army loss. So definitely, I think in some ways a decent build. I think that I didn't want to do Necrosphinx again. I know that's kind of more popular pick against Skaven because they can gap close a lot quicker on the Skaven line. One of the big problems if you are trying to deal with not cannons, the Warp Lightning cannons, is of course that if you can't with, say, the Higher Titan, if I didn't have any way to shut down that Warp Lightning cannon, my opponent would simply be able to slowly but surely chip away at my Higher Titan and snipe it down, and eventually snipe down both of them. But I did have those archers, and I think the archers are, once again, one of those things you never want to underestimate. These guys can definitely lay the smackdown on a entrenched artillery piece. It's something I do with Empire, for example. If you're dealing with Chaos and they bring a Hell Cannon, use your handguns to level the Hell Cannon. Even as Wood Elves chipping away, sniping away at enemy artillery pieces is never a bad idea. You can often get them offline and off the field quickly, and it can be definitely a game changer. Also, I did manage to throw away those carrion just to buy myself some time. Definitely a useful unit for just stalling out the enemy artillery pieces. That's really all they do, but they can do a pretty good job of it. The Kepler Guard anchored things in the center and gave me a little bit of a breathing space. Where otherwise, I don't. Had I been relying on purely these cheap chaff infantry, I would have been in a much worse spot. The single unit of Kepler Guard definitely played an anchor and played a critical role there. And the Higher Titans themselves just slugged out with enemy big units. I did manage to. Obviously, Archon was critical for his Fate of Bunos, which melted down those two annoying Stormvermen. Without the Stormvermen, my opponent's army was much weaker. It didn't have enough anti-large answers. Since its only other anti-large units were the Hell Pit and the quickly shut down Warp Lightning Cannon, of course, the Hell Pit Abomination is just so susceptible to fire. Personally, I'm not a big fan of it against the Tomb Kings. I think that if you're going up against Tomb Kings, you're better off bringing Rat Ogres if you're playing as a Skaven. Rat Ogres are a lot cheaper. You can field about two and a half units of them. You can field 2 units of them in a Clan Rat Spear with shields or something for the price of a Hell Pit Abomination. I think about maybe a little less, maybe just the Clan Rat. But regardless, you can field a good amount of troops, and it will give you enough mass to stop some of the rampaging enemy troops, and it will also give you a little bit more flexibility. It'll give you a little bit more mobility, and they can also, just I think a better investment. They're also not susceptible to that fire damage. Hell Pit Abomination is definitely a little bit gimmicky in the sense that you're relying on those bursts of HP regen, and you're relying on, you're definitely relying a lot on that huge HP pool, which just doesn't work out in a duel with the Higher Titans. Nonetheless, great game to my opponent. Had a lot of fun. I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. If you have any comments, criticism, any questions, anything like that, be sure to share them, and I'll respond as soon as I can. As usual, guys, I do appreciate you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.